It's so cool. Praise the Most High God every day with your whole heart desire.
Welcome to Black History Entertainment. This is another one of our podcasts on the program called Voice of Istri. And this evening we'll be talking about COVID-19 and our mental health with our guest and teammate, Dr. Angella Davis, will be shedding a lot of light on the subject, and she is a renowned psychologist, an experienced person in her field, and so she will walk us through the pace of the issue of COVID-19, which has affected almost everyone on this planet, and especially in our disadvantaged communities where mental health becomes somewhat of a stigma and it's a challenge. So at this time I will take the opportunity to welcome Dr. Angella Davis and let her tell you a little bit about herself, and then we will move right into some very important questions that we have lined up for you, the wonderful guest who is listening. And thank you again for joining us on this afternoon. Angella?
So thank you so much for the opportunity to share what I hope will be some helpful tips with your audience. I am a pastoral psychotherapist. My theoretical approach is more psychodynamic in nature, which means that I help individuals explore the unconscious, or at least understand kind of how trauma might have happened to them as a child, and how it has shaped how they interact or how they behave in relationships. I'm also an ordained minister, and so I've had the wonderful opportunity to serve in various congregations and denominations where I've been teach and preach as well as lead various workshops like this. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to be able to share with you and your audience what I hope will be some helpful tips on how we can continue to get through this pandemic.
Very
and
well.
Congratulations on the radio station as well.
Thank you very much. So we will begin to talk about an overview on the subject of mental health. What exactly is mental health?
So mental health, let me first say, is a broad term. And there is a difference between mental illness and mental health. Many people kind of use the two interchangeably. But when we talk about mental health, in essence, what we're really talking about is the emotional, psychological, and overall well-being of that person. It's how we think, how we feel and act, how we handle stress, how we relate to other people, how we make choices, and how we balance life. Mental illness, on the other hand, is the opposite of acting at that optimal level. So people who might have a diagnosis on any of the psychological and behavioral spectrum, and their thoughts and emotions are impaired, and it affects how they function both personally and professionally. Okay, so I think that's why this is an important and timely topic, because with COVID being what I'm calling a significant public health crisis, this time can be particularly challenging for people who are dealing with a mental illness.
And so since we have actually get a good understanding of what mental health and the things that produce good health for the brain and behavior surrounding having good mental faculty and in good health, we want to look at another piece of COVID-19 in terms of how do you think COVID-19 has impacted us as a nation, as individual and collectively as families together, since we are so closely woven and living in a more confined space with each other.
Right. Well, there's no doubt that this public health crisis called COVID has really disrupted our lives, not just our family and our community and country, but like you said, the entire world. Everything that we know about life, how we do life, how we interact, how we fellowship, travel, celebrate, you name it, has really been disrupted. I mean, all of us have had to adapt to new realities, right? Like working from home. A lot of people have lost their jobs, virtual learning, wearing masks, not being able to travel, spend quality time and celebrate those milestones and traditions. And especially with, people who are most meaningful to us and those who live so far away. And so although this is a new year and there's hope, and I do have hope, the uncertainty of when is this really going to be over, especially as we hear about new strains, does take its toll. So when you ask me, what is the impact? I don't know that we have really seen the full impact as of yet. But we are seeing and hearing that COVID-19 is not just producing some significant anxieties, but it's magnifying a lot of stress symptoms in many people. So, when the data comes out, probably in the next couple of years or so, we're really going to be able to see what the impact really is. But there are some concerning symptoms and issues out there right now that we really do need to talk about.
And the other thing is, I know that as a nation, we have been dealing with COVID-19 for almost maybe a little more than a year now.
Yeah.
And so over that span, I know that some way, one shape or another, we have been exposed to things that we may be able to identify or suspect that has triggered behavior that is not normal to someone who you're close to, or just for that matter, in any relationship that you form, whether it may be friend or family member. So what are some of the common symptoms that people are experiencing and dealing with because of COVID-19? Expound on that a little for me.
So there are a number of indicators that you as an individual or somebody that we are close to are struggling with, and so one of the indicators is going to be some physical symptoms. Now this sort of list is not an exhaustive list because there could be other reasons for these symptoms, but again, these are just examples of things to really pay attention to. So somebody who is really kind of dealing with the stressors of COVID, some of the physical symptoms might look like increased breathing rate. That may be indicative of maybe anxiety or panic attack, maybe increased heart rate. So they're kind of feeling more and more like they're just kind of pounding and want to come out of their chest a little bit. Maybe you're seeing a fluctuation in their blood pressure. It's just kind of going up and down, increased muscle tone. So, maybe they're having sort of more stiffness and muscle spasm and muscle aches and body pains, headache, they're grinding their teeth more. And maybe you're noticing as well that, they seem to be more tired, or you're feeling more tired and sleepy and, or insomnia, just not being able to really sleep, like really get good sleep. Then there's also the behavioral symptoms as well. So that may look like somebody who just sort of lacks enthusiasm for their children and work and family and just life in general. They're physically present, but they're just not emotionally and psychologically there. They seem to be more withdrawn. And this is so tough because, we're being told that we need to withdraw from people and isolate.
Right.
But, what we would be concerned about is just increased privacy and solitude, where it's beyond sort of the whole social distancing, 6 feet and staying away. This is somebody who's just not talking, they're just not opening up. And again, I think that you might see some fatigue as well, just sleeping more, talking maybe more gradually louder and more excitedly. It's just kind of out of their norm. It's not their baseline. And so you're seeing maybe uncharacteristic screaming and just kind of increase personal conflict. You may also be seeing like they've picked up using more alcohol and drugs and tobacco, things along those lines. Then I'd also pay attention to somebody who might be struggling cognitively as well. This is somebody who, again, this is out of their norm. This is not their, so poor problem solving skills, right? Not being able to work through situations, think logically or analytically, poor attention, decision making, not focusing or any regards for consequences. Again, maybe poor concentration, they're seemingly more forgetful than they typically are. And I would say decrease or increase awareness of their surrounding. They're just not as vigilant as they would typically be. And this is what happens when people are stressed. It takes its toll. And then as a result of that, then maybe emotionally they seem to be more depressed. Maybe you're noticing crying spells. They just start, crying, or they're more tearful for seemingly no reason at all. They just start crying. Apathy, just don't care anymore. They're more agitated, frustrated, irritable. And then certainly when someone starts to have suicidal thoughts, we know we're in trouble at that point.
Definitely.
They may not have a plan, but certainly if they start talking about not wanting to wake up or just wanting to give up on life, then we know we're in trouble. And then the last thing that I would add, which I think is important, is you might see people who used to kind of be very spiritual or have a strong faith base begin to sort of question maybe the deity of God. How could a good God make something so bad happen?
Right.
For people who believe in the importance of not forsaking the assembly and now being restricted from gathering together, with like-minded fellow brothers and sisters, this can take its toll, and you might see a falling away from the church or praying or the things that really nurtured their soul. And so we want to definitely pay attention to folks who seem to be deviating significantly from their baseline or their overall temperament and how they typically handle situations, as we're kind of looking at the impact.
Right. And the other, I want to add a little piece to that, because in our culture, mental health carries a deep stigma.
Yeah, it does.
And based on that, most of the time, folks in our culture is intimidated and are afraid of getting help in that area. But on another question, what are some of the strategies or things that we can do to cope and manage our mental health, even though we are surrounded by our culture who looks at mental health in a negative way?
So you'd be surprised to know that these are strategies that most of us are very familiar with. It's not a big secret, but it's the things that seem to be so simple that we often throw out the window, especially when we're overwhelmed and stressed. So the first one, and the most important one that we hear a lot about, is the importance of communication. It's so vitally important that we are communicating with somebody that we are having some difficulty, that we are really struggling. We live in a culture, unfortunately, where we're expected to perform, not just professionally, but personally as well. We're expected to tough up, be a big boy, put on your big girl pants and deal with it. But unfortunately, a lot of people are suffering in silence, and they don't always have somebody they can talk to. They don't have a safe place where they can give expression to what's going on. And so if there's anything that I can say is communicate. Find somebody, whether it's a friend, a trusted family member, an accountability partner, but let somebody need help. So that we know how to help you. The second thing I would say is exercise. Again, any type of physical activity can help to reduce anxiety and really improve our mood. We can find an activity that includes any kind of movement, like thing, or, they have those wonderful exercise apps. Even going outside can make a difference. Going on a nature trail, walking around in your own backyard. Those are things that can be so incredibly helpful to minimize or reduce our stress. And, sex is also another great way to kind of, deal with our stressors. It's a natural painkiller. It releases those feel-good hormones, and it really helps us relax. Nutrition, I would add to that list as well. Making sure that we're paying attention to what we're putting inside of our body. There is a correlation. So we got to make sure that we're eating those well-balanced diet. Even though we're stuck in the house, it doesn't mean that we have to order out all the time. We can find creative ways to cook and make those healthy things. But I think being aware that certain foods will cause highs and lows, in junk food, anything with caffeine and sugar, all of that aggravates our stress and our anxiety as well. And any type of visual or guided imagery can really help to reduce stress as well. It just kind of helps our body relaxes, especially if we're using, mental pictures, and those things introduce real calming thoughts and feelings. And then just having a positive outlook, it's the idea of kind of looking at the glass half full versus half empty. It's the idea of taking the lemons that have been given to us and turning it into lemonade. And then, of course, spirituality, meditation, all of those things are just ways to maintain positive mental health. Just, again, we talked about getting enough sleep, making sure that we have good coping skills and strategies as well. And we stay connected to others. Those are some really key things. They may seem simple, but you'd be surprised how many people, don't utilize those important tools to be able to kind of manage and deal with stressors when they come at us.
Right. So we are almost to the end of the program, and I would like and hope that our guests and our listeners have benefited greatly and have been able to have some takeaway that they can use and employ to help them in throughout the COVID-19 period and the confinement and all the other issues that has been heightened by just the whole environment of the COVID-19 period. But on the same token, I want to tell you thanks for being on the program. I want to tell you that we appreciate you, and I believe the audience also can say the same. So at the final conception of this program, which would lead us to where I want to say to the audience that we are going to bring you back again to discuss more in-depth programming and give us some more information that we can utilize in general with our families and friends. So any last minute tips would be helpful for the listeners. Can you provide us with any last minute tips that you have in mind?
Absolutely, and thank you so much. I would love to come back. So, I think that there are a couple of things that would really be helpful is, making sure that, we control the things that we can control. And so maybe I can leave a couple of things, maybe some that start with a C. So the first thing is control. Right now, there's a lot of things we don't have control over, COVID being one of them. And so instead of focusing on what we cannot control, let's focus on what we can control. So for example, we can control how much sleep we get, we can control how much news we consume, we can control what we eat, but just focusing on what we can control. The second thing I would say is cultivating ways that we can be calm. Practicing, those slow, heavy breathing and muscle relaxation, anything at all that keeps us calm, whether that's music or yoga or meditation, but just making sure that we're cultivating ways that we can stay calm, be consistent, with the routines or traditions that are important to us, especially because we've had to change things up. But as much as we can sort of replicate those things, that will help so much. It will certainly look different. And I would say that if we don't have any traditions or routines, we can create some. And I think this is equally important if we have children as well. It's really that we just maintain a sense of normalcy, that we're talking honestly with them about COVID and using age-appropriate languages, that we're finding and helping them to find positive ways to also kind of manage this and just deal with the stress that they're under. Because while we are at home, they're at home too. And this is too, they're not in school, they're not seeing their friends, they don't really have that creative outlet that they had before, and they're missing out on some of the milestones that are so important to their development. And then I think companionship or camaraderie. I'm a believer that we're made to be in relationships with people, and that has taken a toll, because one of the biggest change is the social isolation. It's so easy to lose our sense of belonging and connection. And so as much as we can stay connected to family and friends, our clergy, our mentors, that is so essential. We just have to redefine what that looks like. So, for some of us who remember snail mail and writing letters, we may have to go back to that. And for those of us who are still struggling and learning how to text, we may have to learn how to do that. But making those phone calls, whether it's, virtually, but just making sure that we stay connected. It may not be the most satisfying thing to do, but I'm telling you, it's very effective. And then I would say two more things. I talked